Rotarians, it's my privilege to introduce our speaker today. I'm sure, like most of you, I've been seeing over the past year and a half a lot of stories about the Smart City Initiative, Smart Columbus, varying stories, getting ready to move the office, right? Getting ready to move the office from Franklinton to Bicentennial Park. And so I won't spend a lot of time regurgitating what you already have in front of you, but I will tell you a little bit about Mark. VP at the Columbus Partnership, a very experienced leader in economic development with a strong background in technology, sales, and marketing. He's had over 30 years of industry experience, including senior roles at some small companies, as well as some very large companies such as Procter & Gamble, Apple Computer, and Kodak. Mark grew up out west, attended Washington University, but came to Ohio back in 2011 when Mark Kwame said, hey, I got some special things happening in Ohio. We'd like to have you come out here and help us out. So he's been here ever since, helping companies grow and expand. And so today he's going to share with us and give us an update on where we are with a $500 million Smart Cities Initiative. Please help me welcome Mark Patton to the stage.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the nice, warm welcome. I've got about 20 minutes, and I've got lots of stuff to fly through. Happy to take all the questions as I'm going or at the end, whatever works great for the group. So let me just kind of frame up what Smart Columbus is and how it came about. So the U.S. Department of Transportation put out this call for mid-sized cities to compete for this pot of money that originally was $40 million from them and $10 million from what was then called Vulcan Ventures. It's been renamed to the Paul G. Allen Family Philanthropies. That doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. But 78 cities competed for that pot of money. And they were overwhelmed as a judging group. They thought 20 cities would submit. So they did a semi-finalist round, and we had pretty good company in there. So moving from the west, you had Portland, San Francisco, Denver, Kansas City, Austin, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. So when you think about it, you know, some really good quality cities you would think of as being innovative. As they pick through it, you know, lo and behold, Columbus is the winner, to the shock of all of those cities, and frankly, I think to the shock of us as well. It was pretty great. When we won it, I've always had people say, well, you know, why were we selected? You know, because we didn't win this because we were the smartest city already. And in the year, I guess year and a half since we won it, we've had a chance to debrief with the people who were on the evaluation committee. And they said, well, they thought we were the best for three reasons. The first was we had a very inclusive set of proposals that we had submitted to do. So it's easy to see where electric vehicles or autonomous vehicles would appeal to really the wealthiest part of the community. But how do you take smart city technologies and apply them to really everybody in the community? So inclusiveness was a really key part. Second thing they thought was important was a public-private partnership. And most of the cities we competed with, because I've met really with all of them, really only competed as a city entity. We came together not only with the city, but with the partnership and really heavy involvement from American Electric Power and OSU. And you know, they thought that was going to be really important. For those of you who don't know, Harvard has published something called the Columbus Way that embodies how that cooperation has worked, and they're now updating that because we won the Smart City Challenge. And the final reason is, as you mentioned, we brought some money to the table as well. Initially, we had $90 million in match from 6 different companies, and today it's grown to a little over $500 million. Now, that's not money I have in my pockets to go spend on things, but it's really aligned investments that we've tracked down from companies that have wanted to work here, perhaps start new businesses and do some investments, and we really, frankly, have new people all the time. The mayor set a goal to see if we could get that to $1 billion. Well, at least I'm halfway there. We have a lot of work to do. Oh, I guess let me back up. No, let me go forward. So what is it the organization look like? I mentioned it's a public-private partnership, and it's really kind of interesting. It's I would call a loosely formed joint venture. This is kind of represents what the group looks like. So we have a whole host of things that we do together. The city, frankly, is the owner and the recipient of the grants themselves. On the private side is the partnership. We're a subrecipient for the electrification work, so we do a lot of that work ourselves. But by and large, we all cooperate to try to make and push Columbus to be the best that we can be. People always ask me, well, you know, how are you coming? I don't necessarily see all these things up and running yet. Well, to be honest with you, a lot of them haven't even launched. Some launched last year. Most of the electrification work is ongoing. A lot of the things that are funded by the Department of Transportation are still in the concept phase. Others are launched. But even at the end of the grant period, we won't all wake up someday and say, oh my gosh, great, now we're all smart. This is a pretty long journey. This will play out over 10 or 20 years. And what I think is interesting and important to keep in mind is, you know, people want to live in a smart city. You know, they want to live in a place that takes advantage of the newer technologies, that drives cost out of the system and provides better services. As I said, that doesn't all happen overnight, but I'm really, really happy to be on the journey to do it. As I was introduced, I came out here in 11 to help set up Jobs Ohio. So I spent 4 years on the pointy end of the spear of selling the state to new businesses. And, you know, Ohio's got a lot of great assets to sell, but having won the Smart City Challenge is like rocket fuel to what we're trying to do. You know, when cities and communities, businesses show up, it's no longer Columbus, Ohio. I travel worldwide for this job, and we're definitely on the map. There was only one smart city winner chosen, and pretty much everybody knows it's us. So play it up whenever it helps you out in your endeavors. So let me kind of set the stage for this. All the smart city stuff is really about a whole set of disruptions that are coming. And they're going to play out in a variety of ways. I couldn't begin to predict how they all fold together. But it's pretty important because we've been disrupted before. If you go back to the turn of the century, this is a street scene in New York City in about just right past the turn of the century. We're not entirely sure of the date, maybe 1903. But you'll notice there is nothing but horse-drawn buggies. There's one automobile in that photograph. And that is the same street scene 10 years later. And there is but one horse-drawn buggy. Everything else is a car. And what's really interesting about that is the pace of change 100 years ago was a lot slower than it is today. You know, the way information dispersed, you know, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have television, you didn't have really radio, you didn't have all those things that helped spread innovation. Yet in a period of just 10 years, all that stuff changed over. And the reason I bring that up, go back, is Columbus was the buggy manufacturing capital of North America. 1 in every 4 buggies were built right here in Columbus. And when that transition occurred, we lost that business. And you think about in the last 100 years, as the development of the automobile, it's a pretty big part of the Columbus and Ohio economy. We're the number 2 OEM and parts manufacturing state in the country. So as you think about these transformations, it's like, wow, let's make sure we're ready for this next pivot because it's going to be really big. Now, as I talk about that, there are 4 things, if you didn't walk out of here with anything else, but the understanding of these 4 elements of the change, I'll have been successful. So the acronym is CASE, and it has 4 elements. So the first I'm going to start with is connectedness. That's the C. What's interesting about automobiles today is they're not connected really to anything. And you think about that in an age when pretty much everybody in this room has a smartphone that connects them to friends, family, email, the stock price, the weather that we've talked about. I mean, you name it, right? Everybody's connected all the time, 24/7. But the cars we drive today aren't connected. Well, that's going to change really, really quickly. Cars are going to be connected to cars. Cars are going to be connected to infrastructure. These radios are being installed in cars right now, even though they're not necessarily live. So this is going to be a big change. It has a lot to do with safety and how do you move people on the roads more efficiently. The second one is autonomous. So the fun thing in this job, people ask me all the time, it's like, well, Mark, when do autonomous vehicles show up in the market? Well, the answer is they're here today, but they're not in the form that people think of. So autonomy goes in 5 levels. Level 5 has no steering wheel, no pedals, no controls. That's a ways out. What we have today is level 2. Level 2 is a combination of auto steer, which means the car can figure out how to keep itself between the 2 lines on a road, and cruise control, adaptive cruise control. Those 2 things together make level 2. And lots of cars have that technology today. Most famously, people think of a Tesla autopilot. That's all it is a combination of those 2 technologies. So, that exists today. I think most people are aware that Uber had a very unfortunate incident a couple of weeks ago in Arizona. Probably not surprising. At the same time, somebody died as a result of a crash with a car in autopilot. On that same day, like 140 people died in car crashes. So, this technology can make our roads safer, make us safer, but they don't take all the accidents out of the equation. Shared, this is the S in case. This is probably one of the most disruptive, surprisingly, of all of these. And it's not necessarily a new technology, but it's a combination of things that really change how the economy can work. So I think most people are familiar with Uber and Lyft, right? So those are sharing, but quite frankly, we've been sharing taxi cabs and rental cars for a very long time. The sharing economy, though, is really, really an interesting one. In our market, we have currently bike sharing in the KOGOs. Those are docked bikes. The city will soon launch and pilot some dockless bike sharing. Hopefully we don't end up, if you ever see those pictures out of China with big piles of bikes everywhere, hopefully we manage it better than that. But we have certainly Uber and Lyft. I think the most interesting one in this bucket that we have just launched is Chariot. Has anybody heard of Chariot? A handful of folks. So Chariot is something that's called microtransit. So CODA is a transit agency. They run 40-passenger buses on pretty much fixed routes. CODA just redesigned their routes for the first time in 30 years, right at the tail end of the year. Chariot can change their routes in 24 hours. They're all crowdsourced, so the pickup and drop-off locations are controlled by people's cell phones. Chase was the launch partner for these guys. Ford Mobility bought the company about 1.5 years ago. And this is really going to be an important new, I think, mobility option for all of the businesses in Ohio. This was only the 5th expansion city that they went into. Number 6 was London, so I'm feeling pretty good about our priorities in this. But it's, as time goes on, you can put people in 12-passenger vans that are on some of the less frequently traveled routes of, say, CODA, and then CODA can redirect some of their resources and increase frequency on the really important routes. So this will ripple over time, but it's a really, really important change for us. And finally, electric. So the electrification of really transportation, especially as it relates to the personal car. This is going to be a big, big change. We're in the early stages. We have less than 0.5% of the cars in the market today in Columbus are electric. Our job is to quadruple that. And you may say, well, that's kind of a small drop in the bucket. And it is, but it sets us on a path because truly all cars will be electric someday in the future. I don't know how far out that is. We get a chance in Smart City to talk to all the automakers, and everybody is heading in this direction. And we have a lot of work going on to get us there. But what's interesting is you look at some of the new models that are available. Up until this year, I think you had 2 choices in electric cars. They were either really expensive or they were really ugly. And this year you've got some really good choices. These 3 models, and I would also add to this list the Honda Clarity, which is just going to be introduced here shortly, have a couple things in common. They're affordable. they're under 40,000 before you take off the $7,500 federal tax credit on these. They can all go at least 150 miles. That's important because the average commute's about 40 round trip, so that gives you plenty of range. And they're actually pretty good looking cars. So these are all available. We have lots of stuff that we're developing to help people get a sense of how these work. So that's the CASE acronym. All four of those things are interacting at the same time to disrupt our current businesses. I talk about this in terms of mobility, but by the way, these set of technologies and changes are going to affect lots of stuff. Education, healthcare, and the like. So don't just think about this stuff in the terms of mobility. So with that as kind of a quick background, let me talk about what we're doing. So if you're going to put electric cars out, you've got to get your grid modernized. American Electric Power has been a huge partner in this. In our original 90 million, they had 27 million pledged to this initiative. That's grown to $185 million. It's really, really an important part of getting ourselves with smart meters and the kind of power that it requires to shift from gas-powered to electric-powered vehicles. Charging. If you're going to drive an electric car, you've got to think, well, I can go charge that at some place, right? So there's 80% of the people who buy an electric car today charge them at home. They never go to the gas station. It's really, really convenient. But not everybody has the ability to charge at home. So we need public charging, we need workplace charging, and we need to get them into places where we get multi-unit dwellings, so apartments and condos. We have about 105 public chargers today. In the end of 4 years, we're going to have probably 1,600. We'll have lots of charging. But what's interesting is, you drive down the road today, and if you need gas, you see, oh, I see a BP sign, I see a Shell sign, whatever. Electric vehicles probably won't work that way. Again, they'll go back to your phone. You'll pull up an app, and it'll tell you exactly where to go, and it can route you to those locations. So lots of work going on here. Lots of these chargers coming into the market right now. Connected. I mentioned the connected vehicle. We're testing a couple of interesting routes. The routes in blue are funded by the grants that we're talking about. The route in black that goes from Dublin up into Marysville is a separately funded plan from the Department of Transportation. Those routes will give us in Ohio more connected vehicle miles than really anywhere in the US. This is still pretty early technology, but they've been testing it for 10 years. This is a global standard. So it's not just about a car in Ohio can drive on these connected vehicles. It's all across the US and it's all across the world. So these are coming quickly. What's really interesting is we just launched with CODA the bus rapid transit line down Cleveland Avenue, right? Well, this will really be rapid when this is installed and up and running. So imagine the bus is heading down Cleveland Avenue and there is people at a bus stop. So as the bus pulls over to stop, the approaching light can turn red because the bus isn't coming anyway. And as the bus prepares to leave, that bus can control those signals all the way down the road. So at the next intersection, imagine there's nobody at the bus stop. That signal can stay green and really prioritize the bus. So it's just an example. There's lots of other use cases. But all this is going to be live here in the next year. The most important thing, I think, in our overall program is something we call the Smart Columbus operating system. It's where all the data goes that helps power a new smart city. We have been working really hard on this. There is a IT services contract that is about to be awarded for getting this built. It's the one thing that the U.S. Department of Transportation and other cities are looking for our Columbus win. We have a great vision for this. We've got lots of people helping on it. And this will really, really fundamentally change how the city delivers services over the long period of time. And it's not just going to be city stuff. We're also going to have private company data in this. So we worry about all the things that you might imagine around security and privacy and how to anonymize that data. Tons of work going into this, but really on a great path to deliver on the operating system. Next set of things that we have are some small tests and pilots. So we do have, or have had, I should say, an autonomous vehicle test planned. If anybody has read in the papers and the coverage, this was always envisioned to run from the transit center up behind Walmart at Easton out to the businesses. Well, about a month ago, we had 9 of the largest autonomous vehicle shuttle-style manufacturers in town. And there's not a single one of those vendors that would put a vehicle on that route because it had to cross Morris Road. So we're a little bit back to the drawing board, and it was all about safety. These vehicles today will only go about 25 miles an hour. On a good day, traffic's probably going 38 on that road. So we need to find another route that really solves a real problem, but we'll certainly get these launched probably sometime in this next year. I'm going to kind of skip over truck platooning. That's, I think, pretty well understood. But I did talk about inclusiveness. So 2 things that we're working on there. One is, how do we better connect people in entry-level jobs from where they live to where those jobs are? So the 2 biggest job centers that fit that description are at Rickenbacker and out at the New Albany Business Park. And if you've ever been out to those areas, lots of jobs, not a lot of housing, not a lot of workforce there. So how do you do a better job of connecting all the elements of the transit system, certainly the bus and COTA being in the middle of that, to just make it easier for people to get reliably to and from their job? The second thing we're tackling in this program is trying to get at the very high infant mortality in Linden. So we have certainly more than one low-income neighborhood in Columbus, but the mayor decided, let's really focus on one, in this case Linden, and really understand what the problems and the challenges are. And if we figure out how to fix it there, we can certainly expand it to other areas. One of the challenges is high infant mortality. The biggest driver that we think we can tackle is the mobility challenge of getting expectant mothers to and from the doctor's appointment. And it works like this. You can actually get there pretty easily, but a round-trip doctor's appointment can take 6 or 7 hours to get back home. So what happens is the second time, it's like, well, this is a lot of work, and then they don't go. So we think if we can really solve that problem, and there's lots of resources to do it, we can help really not solve it, but certainly address some of that. Final piece of this, how am I doing time-wise? Am I good?
Oh, you're great.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Final piece of this is how do we get people to change how they think about commuting? So we have a population in the metro area of 2.1 million people. Fastest growing city in the Midwest, second largest city in the Midwest. We just passed Indianapolis. And if we add another million people, which is the projection in the next, let's say, 15 years, and we don't do anything different than we're doing today, our nice commutes from, say, Dublin or New Albany into the downtown, which are a half hour today, suddenly they become 60 or 70 minutes. And that quality of life that we all enjoy here goes right down the tubes. So how do we take advantage? We don't think, by the way, building new roads is the solution, but if you take advantage of all that stuff in case, and we get better systems to help people predict how you're going to make a trip, how to have a single payment system, we can go a long ways towards solving this. So what we put out against the members of the partnership, and for those of you who don't know, the Columbus Partnership is about 65 fairly large companies in town, makes up 30% of the overall workforce. But it's a group because they're members of our organization, we can communicate with them very, very directly. So we've asked to do 2 things. It's drive electric and drive less. So we're trying to get them to drive electric vehicles. We've asked, here it is. We're trying to get to 1.8%. We've asked executives to personally buy electric vehicles. I set a goal of 50. When I report at the end of Friday, we're at 26. So pretty well on our way. One of the key things on this initiative is get people a chance to drive an electric vehicle. So we're putting on fairly massive ride and drive events. We put on 10 last year, reached about 900 people. Anybody go to the auto show? So we went to the auto show. We had 10% of the overall floor space. We had almost another 900 rides, both on the road and within the building. And then this year, we'll put on another 50 events and reach about 10,000 people. It's really important because, you know, the goal here is to get people to make a considered purchase to buy an electric vehicle. And if you've never driven one, you're probably not going to do it. The second thing we're trying to do in this initiative is get people to drive less. So I mentioned launching Chariot. We're working with companies to figure out how they could put together mobility packages for employees to make them think about it. We're bringing new solutions around carpooling, van sharing, ride sharing, bike sharing, the whole host of things. We set a goal to say, could we get a 10% reduction in the next 4 years within the partnership of single occupancy commutes? It's going to take a long time. Seattle launched a very similar initiative a year ago with a 40% reduction. But if you've been to Seattle lately, it's incredibly congested. You know, we have the advantage of having pretty nice commutes today. But if we don't take advantage, as I said, you know, we'll find ourselves in the same boat and think, gosh, how come we didn't do something back in 2018? So that's why we're starting today. This is a long journey. I'm not expecting instant results. But that's it. I want to make sure we've got time for questions, and I'll open it up.
If you push for electric vehicles, and a lot of people don't drive a car in larger cities, what's going to replace the road tax that pays for maintenance?
Yeah, a lot of cities, and I think the most logical one is a use tax. You know, the more miles you put on, the more tax you'll pay. You know, you can't do that today because you can't track it. When you get to connected vehicles, you can track every mile they run and where they run them. Yes?
When you're charging one of your electric cars, do all the manufacturers have the same plug into your car, or is each one proprietary per manufacturer?
Well, of course they're not all the same. No, there's like 3 or 4. Of course. I mean, yeah. There's adapters. The only one that is completely proprietary is Tesla. Of course, they can plug into anything. But by the way, they can open that up at any point they would like to. They built a competitive advantage like no other by installing it. But I think at some point they would open that up. But yeah, there's 4 standards. Yes?
How is the work your organization is doing helping Columbus, assuming we want it, get Amazon's next headquarters?
Well, they're very interested in the things that we're working on. The smart city, you know, I think helped get us into you know, the finalist group. They think very much about how to commute, electrification. I mentioned Seattle trying to drive a 40% reduction in single occupancy commutes. A lot of that, frankly, is because of Amazon. I mean, it's the density of South Lake Union is unbelievable. As I said, you know, maybe you heard I grew up in Seattle, and that was about the sleepiest part of town you could imagine. And today it's, I mean, it's just huge. So we've been a part of all those visits, and is helpful and full of suggestions and open to things that they'd like us to do as possible. Yes?
You talked about the challenge of getting people to change their way of thinking about things. One of the first parts in doing that is to communicate with them about what the possibilities are. Who in your effort here, or where, is there a coordinator of a broad-scale communications campaign to help inform and educate the public of what this actually means? We all feel good about it, we just don't know what it really is. I mean, that's why today your presentation is very necessary.
Gosh, I'm really glad I called on you. So we just wrapped up last Tuesday. We've held a series of Smart Columbus Live events at the Idea Foundry. You said you had been to one of them, or one of you went to one. So we had 1,500 people through those. We're in the process of opening an experience center that's right on Civic Center Drive in what was the parking garage from the old Columbia Gas Building. And we'll have electric vehicles in there. We'll have the whole story of Smart Columbus. It happens to be on the street where most all the festivals are held during the course of the summer months. You know, we expect to have thousands of people through there. I'm trying like heck to open it by the Arts Festival on June 8th. I'm not sure I'll make it, but I'm going to work really hard.
One follow-up, you have the ideal environment in which to start training the next generation, and it's called COSI.
Yes. Yeah, and we've been chatting with them about putting things in there, and they actually helped us think through how to design our space. They were incredibly helpful. Thanks. Way in the back.
Yeah, a two-part question. It strikes me that this operating system is going to be collecting a tremendous amount of data from individuals, what they do, where they drive, where they go. Who owns that data, and what controls are there going to be over how that data is used by the government or sold to third parties, et cetera?
Fabulous question. So it's not built yet. Our vision is that it'll ultimately be housed in a NGO in town. Maybe you could guess it's the one we're thinking of, but it will not be a city-run asset, and it won't be run by a private company. It will have an NGO governance structure to it. Now, the security thing is so interesting. 2 weeks ago, we had a gentleman in town who spent 30 years at the NSA as the deputy director, and he was in, really, I would just say, testing Jody, who's our deputy program manager, who's driving the build of this thing. And I don't know about you, to think you're going to face down a guy who spent 30 years with the NSA and answer all his questions about security, I'll tell you, I was very proud. I wouldn't say we had the answer to every single question that he asked, but I think the conceptual thinking around privacy, anonymous, how do you make this stuff anonymous, you know, because you don't really want to know that I moved from the boathouse to Ohio State, but it's okay to know that somebody did. So I think we're really well on the path, but a lot of work. I think most interesting of all his comments was, and I think of this from the top spy, he said, you know, you will get hacked. He said there is no such thing as security. He said it's all about what do you do after you do get hacked. I thought, okay, great, nice to know. So he gave us some good things to go think about. Yes?
I'm wondering how you get real estate developers more involved in this process. There's cities around the country neighborhoods being built from the ground up for autonomous vehicles, and real estate is ongoing. People are building things that, you know, may be obsolete in time, so I'm sure they're interested. So what ways do you get them more involved in this process?
Well, I've had lots of developers into our Smart Columbus Live sessions. I've personally called on maybe another dozen of them, and we talk to them all the time about charging infrastructure in the buildings, and do you really need to build new parking garages? I mean, those are really the key things. And also maybe how do you have really good you know, common pickup and drop-off points for shared vehicles, so Uber and Lyft, so you don't clog up the towns. But we're really trying to get people not to build parking garages to the extent we can. You know, their useful life is far longer than we'll probably need those parking garages. And also talk about getting, if you're going to build new, you know, put the conduit in, because the electric cars have to charge, all the autonomous cars will be electric, and they need to go charge somewhere as well. So happy to bring any other developers to the table. Yes?
Talking about electric, you've talked exclusively about battery power. Hyundai has said publicly it believes the future is hydrogen fuel cell. Toyota, Honda, and Nissan have just announced a massive investment in Japan in hydrogen refueling stations. Why do we think it's batteries?
Wow, great question. So the Japanese bet fuel cells, the only US company that did was GM, and none of the German companies bet on it at all. If you look at a chart of global ability to refuel a vehicle, of course, you know, gasoline would be a bar this high. The next one down is electric. Fuel cell is about that big. I think the race is over, to be honest with you. I think it's going to go electric. And I've had lots of conversations with Japanese automakers that would say the same thing. I think that battle's over. Yes?
I'm going to give you an easy question. Talk to us about the Hyperloop. Did you get to ride on the Hyperloop? What is that?
Well, we're only marginally involved in the Hyperloop, although I actually did go see the test track. I was out at CES in January, and it's real. I mean, I thought that was, pretty conceptual, but they have a half-mile long test track. It's not pressurized, or it runs at a vacuum, and the car is not pressurized. So no human has ever been down the track, as they'd blow up. We've got some interesting studies going on. I think that's, best case, I think that would be minimum of 10 years away. Give you perspective, it's about $100 million a mile to run a Hyperloop.
Last question.
Oh, last question I'm heard. Yes?
We've talked a lot about electric cars and transportation. How about other smart things like cryptocurrency? Is that anywhere on the radar for the city?
No. Not currently.
Light rail, where is that in the conversation? Because I know several years back there was talk about maybe one running down the light rail. Is that anywhere in all of this?
Well, as we'd like to say, we don't want to be the last city in America that puts in light rail. And I think that last city's already been built. It's incredibly expensive. It would take us years and years and years to get the right of way. There are way faster ways to get not only to mass transit that takes advantage of dedicated right of way. So imagine the route people want to connect is OSU to downtown. You could take a lane out of the center of High Street and do some reconfiguration. You could have that running in a couple of years. So that's one route. Frankly, the Amazon thing has forced us to think about and really understand from an urban planning, how would you take care of some of those things? And then there's also the notion of individual pods. So as autonomous vehicles, way faster than we'd get light rail up and running, there could be pods that are really just one and two person. They come right to your door and take you to either another station or right directly to your route. So we're definitely not running down a light rail path at all.
All right. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. We appreciate everything that you're doing to advance the city of Columbus. Everyone, you're welcome to come back next Monday. Our next meeting will have Lisa Cortice, the CEO of Central Ohio United Way. Thank you.